Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the air with Brian Gregory on this fine Monday evening. We're coming from Fort Worth, Texas. We have Will Miller on here today, who's a writer for why am I drawing a blank here? For Sports Illustrated, the Alabama site. Remind me of what's BamaCentral.
Mm-hmm. There you
go. I don't know why I totally fumbled that. I've been multitasking for like the past 20 minutes. I've got a video coming out here in a little while about the Jalen Ramsey Minka Fitzpatrick trade. So my mind is everywhere. I knew that. Forgive me, but like I just completely choked on that. But it's great to have you on here, Will.
Thanks for having me, Brian. I really appreciate it, my friend.
Absolutely, we've been planning this one for a while, and now I'm. It's always great when you see a plan come into fruition.
Yeah, you can say that again. And I guess that brings us into our subject, right?
Yes, we're talking Bama recruiting today, which has been absolutely on fire these past several weeks. I mean, the latest example was yesterday afternoon. Bama made a huge splash by landing Xavier Griffin, who's from the state of Georgia. He's now on the Tide. It's always great when we can steal somebody from the state of Georgia. It's such a gratifying feeling. But there's been many others that Alabama has been able to land these past several weeks too. And so I just want to ask you, I know you work with BamaCentral, Sports Illustrated. What's the recipe here? How is Alabama starting to gain so much momentum? What's the secret sauce?
I think it's just Kalen DeBoer continuing to establish himself on this side of the recruiting trail and doing it at an SEC level. You've heard all the comments, theories, superlatives, nicknames, whatever people want to, people kind of want to dig Kalen DeBoer's grave on the recruiting side after he's replacing Nick Saban and talking about the end of the Saban discount and all sorts of other things. And they failed to take into account this is a guy that's brought high-level talent into a number of different programs. I mean, he had NFL talent coming out of Fresno State, Jake Haener. He's done a really good job. He's got a staff like Courtney Morgan, for example, that have been outstanding. And they've got a really good portal group. They've gotten some impact transfers. And I think even some of those guys like Jeremy Bernard are going to take the next step this year. And I know those aren't obviously high school recruits this year, but just in terms of building a roster, putting things together, establishing that culture with a new system and a new coaching staff, and really having a lot to prove after last year. But I think that in that respect, Kalen DeBoer has definitely hit the ground running. He's really selling what this program is and can continue to be under his leadership. And I think that you're seeing some of this top talent buy in like you would have in the past, because Alabama's no stranger at this point to getting some of these marquee recruits. But people have predicted some tougher sledding now that Nick Saban is gone, and Kalen DeBoer has proven that he can still reel some of these guys in.
Well, and that's just the thing is you have the combination of a known skilled recruiter like Kalen DeBoer, and you have a program with the brands and the magnetism, the prominence of Alabama. How is it not going to succeed? I mean, I don't see where people would gather the notion of, oh, they're going to fall off. Granted, you have one of the best recruiting coaches of all time in Nick Saban. I mean, that goes without saying. And so, of course, there were some guys in the building last year that transferred to other places. Like, look at Caleb Downs, look at Isaiah Bond. Look, it happens. But I did not think that recruiting momentum was going to fall off that much, just because of the brands, just because Kalen DeBoer is a great salesperson. And he also has a proven track record of being able to develop guys like Michael Penix Jr., like you said, Jake Haener, Rome Odunze. I mean, so many guys. And it's only going to get better here for the Tide. I'm looking at some of these guys here: Xavier Crowell, Zion Gibson, Zay Hall, who went to Hillcrest High School. I love seeing that. I love seeing guys from the state of Alabama. Zion Gibson's from Gadsden, Xavier Crowell's from Jackson. I love seeing guys from the state of Alabama play for the Tide too, because and do you think that's part of the strategy too? Because I think it's easier to be more passionate for the team you play for when you're from in-state.
That's absolutely true. And now you have a generation of recruits that are coming up that grew up with Alabama as the dominant force in this sport. Some of these kids were born in, 2007, right when Nick Saban arrived. And they've seen, they don't know a world where Alabama's not in the mix, where Alabama's not competing for A, five-star blue chip prospects, and B, championships, SEC championships, national championships. They've been the talk of the town for such a long time. And the modern landscape of the sport, whether directly or indirectly, has basically been shaped around people who were mad that they couldn't stop them. I mean, you got to a point where that's what the results of these things are. I mean, all of this conference realignments and everything that have happened over the last number of years, all these changes have been to kind of try to take a chunk out of Alabama's dominance, because it was one of the greatest dynasties in the history of collegiate sport. I mean, you talk about Alabama football. I mean, there's other examples. USC baseball once upon a time, UConn women's basketball. I mean, Alabama football is right up there. These kids have grown up right in the thick of it. This was happening, when they were kids, when they were at a formative age, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. And now they get to grow up and put on that uniform that they saw on TV every single Saturday, go and run all over people. I think there's a lot of pride that you can have in that. And people talk about, in today's era of college sports, maybe that factor diminishing because of the money piece and the transfer portal and just some of this ability for movement that didn't exist, wasn't even a thought when you and I were that age. But I think that component can still be there for some of these kids that grew up in the state of Alabama and really even in the Southeast. I mean, they got A.K. Deere coming in from Mississippi as a running back that I think is going to be really good. And Mississippi can turn out talent too, obviously. And, I mean, you want to steal those guys from conference foes. Talk about Ole Miss stealing A.J. Brown from right under Mississippi State's nose. And, that one, I bet that one probably still haunts whoever was on the Mississippi State recruiting staff at that time. But those are the type of guys that you want to bring in. Right, and having the dominance that Alabama has had over the last decade and a half plus is going to help you do that.
I wonder if we're starting to see a trend here where guys are going to start to stay in their home states. Like I was just kind of ruminating on that today, leading up to this, as I was preparing for the show, because I've been doing a lot of digging into recruiting over the past weekend. After what Alabama's done and Georgia, I have to acknowledge Georgia has been absolutely on fire as well. I have a video coming out about Georgia tomorrow that I put together. But doing research for that, I saw the same thing. A lot of guys from in-state going to Georgia.
Helps to have a factory like Buford, like you do in Georgia.
You've got Buford there. You've got powerhouses in Alabama. Like I know that Trustful is one.
Yeah, Hewitt.
Saraland is another one. Thompson's another one. You can capitalize on those powerhouses, can really maintain some momentum here. But I like it. I want guys that grew up drinking sweet tea, eating, okra on this team, cornbread. Those are the kind of guys that I want on this team. No shame on the guys from California, New Jersey, and whatnot.
Bryce Young is from California.
I know. So, you can only push that so far, but generally I like guys that grew up in that backgrounds playing for Alabama. So I'm really starting to like that shift, seeing that out of both Alabama and Georgia. What would you say? This is a general question for you here, because you're in Tuscaloosa right now, and I'm not, unfortunately. Someday I'll be back. But what's the temperature in the room right now around Kalen DeBoer and this program? Because I know last year was quote unquote disappointing, but I really see some momentum building up with the team we have this year and what we've done on the recruiting trail. So what's the general feel around the team right now?
I think momentum is a good way to put it. And there's excitement brewing for this season because a lot of people, whether they be fans, whether they be stakeholders in the program or players and coaches, a lot of people pointedly, they just want to get the bad taste out of their mouth. Last year didn't live up to the expectations, and not in the ways that you would have expected. I mean, coming into the year, people thought, they'll drop a game to, LSU and they'll be in trouble in maybe some of these other situations. Maybe they lose the Georgia game. Those things didn't happen, and they end up dropping games that are flatly embarrassing to lose. And not only were they embarrassing, but the team played so poorly in them and still seemed like you controlled your own destiny as late as mid-November, and you go lay an egg in Norman to the worst Oklahoma team that I can recall, since you and I have been alive, basically. That's another, blue blood powerhouse, premier top shelf program, and they shouldn't have made a bowl game last year. Auburn handed them a game because Peyton Thorne played terrible, and Alabama just rolled over and died to them. And so we got the pleasure of watching Navy run all over an SEC team, which admittedly I enjoyed a good bit. But Alabama wants to get those memories down the drain as fast as possible. They have assembled a group of players and returning players as well with their mind toward doing that this year. And there's a real feeling that that's what they can accomplish, that they can be back on the pedestal for a longer stretch of time than they were last year, not necessarily dropping situations that you're not supposed to be, because that didn't happen under Nick Saban. And Kalen DeBoer has a lot to prove. He needs to show that this is not the new reality. These are not games that Alabama is going to lose now. They're games everybody else loses. They're not games Alabama usually lost. And he doesn't want to be the coach that you attach that kind of, I guess, trend to, where his teams can't get ready to play against teams they're supposed to beat, because that is the pitfall of good teams, and it's the pitfall of good coaches. And Kalen DeBoer is a really good coach. I think there's a lot of excitement, though, to just put that stuff in the past and go forward.
But preparation is key. Those first couple of years are formative. What I always say is, any true Bama fans out there, and I know there's some that are real, and there's some that, are bandwagon fair weather fans. I'll just call it as it is. If you're a true Bama fan, you'll remember 2007, Louisiana Monroe, coached by Nick Saban, that Alabama team that year. That was his first year. Lost to Louisiana Monroe, the Warhawks. And that's that. There's some good group of 5 teams out there.
They're not one of them.
Louisiana Monroe does not have much of a history at all.
They were the beginning of the downfall of Arkansas, too, beating them when Arkansas was like 8th in the country.
I remember that.
What was it?
That was I forget
12
what
or 13. I think it was 2012 that they did that. I mean, you talk about an athletic program, and no shade to them, because I got love for Louisiana Monroe, but I mean, one of the they're not one of those teams at any level of Division I sport that they're not funded great. They don't have a ton of resources. They don't have the ability to stack up and compete the same way that their mid-major peers do. And here they go picking off top flight, SEC teams about half a decade apart back in those days, which it's just funny that it's the same team, looking back on it, and they giving other people scares. You think about, think UAB got one on LSU a while back too, like several years ago. And then obviously the Troy game was outstanding to watch. I remember that one like it was yesterday. So, I mean, you'll see teams, powerhouse teams lose to mid-majors, but Louisiana Monroe, is just calling it like it is. They're not one of those that you would elevate to that highest level of that echelon, so to speak.
Right. So was the Vandy loss bad last year? Yeah, it was embarrassing, but it was also a Vanderbilt team that was a lot better than people expected, because people have associated Vanderbilt with like the shit of the shit the past couple of years, and they were actually competitive. They played a bowl game. They beat Georgia Tech. Like this was a legit team last year. Diego Pavia had a fantastic season. This was a Nick Saban team that lost to Louisiana Monroe. And I know that he didn't inherit the same kind of team that Kalen DeBoer has, but there were still formidable teams, back in 06, 07. And so it's not like he inherited a complete shit team either. And so fact of the matter is here, last year is last year. You've got to put it behind us. There's going to be growing pains when you're taking over for a legend, and you're going into a season with a new playoff format, a new conference play format. I'll be honest, I'm surprised it didn't fall through more than it did last year. It didn't unravel more than it did last year. Like 9-3 to me is still Now, granted, while I still had that Alabama standard, 9-3 to me is very realistic for last year. So, but you shift the focus to this year, and the focus is very much on rebounding and getting back to what we've been for the past 15 years. And no, that's another question for you here. Do you think that we have the infrastructure in place to do that in Tuscaloosa this year?
I don't think there's any doubt in that. Especially and there are more changes with the House settlement and revenue sharing, which Alabama said they're fully going to fund. I feel like Alabama maybe didn't handle the public face side of pre-House settlement NIL the best. And it was always, Alabama doesn't have infinite money. Alabama fans should donate to NIL, which, Alabama doesn't have infinite money. They don't have a Hugh Hathcock. They don't have what's his name, John Ruiz. They don't have Jimmy Rain. They don't. What's the guy at Texas Tech? Alabama doesn't have a guy like that. I mean, all of these things are true, but after the amount of winning that Alabama had done and trouncing people that Alabama had done, it didn't come off looking the best. But now that revenue sharing has come out and Alabama's pledged the full might of the resources into that, I feel like you're going to see less of those things. They have the talent, obviously, and they had a talented team last year. I wasn't as high on them as some people preseason, like, it's the most talented, XYZ roster is the most talented, one of the most talented rosters in the sport. I didn't really think that, and they didn't really turn out to necessarily wow people at a lot of points last year, and in fact underwhelmed, I think, more than they outshined in many respects. But this team, I think, is better. I think that, and the new quarterback is going to be a question mark. How is Ty Simpson going to step in and handle the new role? But I think around him are the pieces, and again, the additions that they've made, the recruits they have coming in. Griffin's one of those guys that could play day one. He could be on the field for the first snap of the season, depending on what kind of, summer practice session that he has. And so, I do think that this team, like I said, they're chomping at the bit to get going. They're ready to go. And I think there's a lot of energy there towards just, getting down to it. And I think this team has the talent to take that next step from where they were last year.
And you put it perfectly there too. I think that this year's team looks better than last. Like I think that the roster, I think that the depth chart looks better than it did last year. Last year's team, I think the best way to describe it, Will, was wonky. It was, and
I prefer mercurial.
Mercurial. I haven't heard that word in a while. I may start using that again. The vast vocabulary of Will Miller. Love that word. But I look at last year's team, and I said this. I want your thoughts on this. I never thought that Jalen Milroe and the system that Nick Sheridan and Kalen DeBoer envisioned last year were ever a match. I think that was always a contested point for the team, and that's why Alabama's offense regressed a lot last year. I think he started to lose confidence because he wasn't in a system that he felt comfortable in or that he fit in. Alabama's offensive production started to dip. It wasn't consistent at all. And I thought that there were just several holes last year. I don't think that the offensive line ever amounted to what we expected it to be last year. Luckily, a lot of guys returns. You've got Caden Proctor still there.
Oh, he's so much better now. You wouldn't believe it's like night and day.
Oh my God. He is forecasted to be a top 10 pick next year.
Higher than that.
Which is insane because I work with him at Alabama. I actually worked with Caden Proctor quite a bit at Alabama when I was with player development. So that's gonna be weird to see him go in the top 10. I worked with him when he was a freshman. So I back in the formative days.
Am I hearing it's your fault, Brian? Is that what you're trying to tell us?
Well, I may have had some influence. I may have coached him up on his technique a little bit. But no, what are your thoughts on that pairing with Jalen Milroe and DeBoer and Sheridan's vision for that offense last year? Because I always thought there was a mismatch.
Well, my feeling is that a lot of people looked at that and thought you were going to get Michael Penix 2 when in reality it's two different archetypes of players. I mean, not to say that Michael Penix's improvement wasn't great, because, I mean, this was a guy, I mean, he's had so many, you know, not even just how he was playing when he was in Indiana, but the injuries that he had, you know, multiple season-ending knee injuries that he dealt with in his career. And you just as easily could have said, you know what, this dude's career's in the can. He's never going to be anything more than serviceable. And then, boom, he becomes arguably the best quarterback in the sport, even though I think it was probably Bo Nix. With retrospective analysis, I think people thought Jalen Milroe was going to turn into the next version of this. Oh, he's here, and now he's way up here. And the type of player that Jalen Milroe is, I don't think it was just going to be you take what you did with Michael Penix, you apply that same stuff to Jalen Milroe, and you get the exact same result. That was never going to happen. I'm not saying that I think that's what the coaching staff did, because I don't know. I do think that progression was not going to look exactly the same. I think another thing that disappointed people about Milroe was just how streaky he was. He would play well one week, and then the next week, I mean, if you could go back and play the game again, you would probably bench him in a couple of the games that you played last year for just the way that he couldn't get anything going. Like that Tennessee game, which I do think he was hurt during that game, as a lot of people do. But, you know, the Oklahoma game, you could tell me that was worse. I wouldn't argue with you for how he played. I think that's what disappointed people the most about him. I don't think he was the only problem with the team by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that he wasn't what he expected to be or what the coaching staff expected to be. And there's a learning curve. There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be new stuff that maybe, again, you would do differently with the benefit of hindsight. I certainly think that applies to Jalen Milroe. But my main point just is I think they saw something from someone else in a different team, in a different system that they maybe thought would carry over that didn't. And that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'll gather too, is that there was a vision that was there. You know, I think that there was a lot of comparative analysis between what we saw Michael Penix Jr. the year before and then Jalen Milroe, expecting him to adopt that same style and take that same leap. Whereas, like you said, they are not at all the same player. I mean, Michael Penix Jr. is a pass-first quarterback. You know, fantastic deep ball, spreads the field out. He's got like an aerial style about him. Where
millions of times more accurate than Jalen Milroe will ever be throwing the football, and that was his greatest strength coming straight out of college. Was his he could throw the ball in any pocket or window that you wanted him to throw it in. Jalen Milroe was never going to be that, and you know, Jalen Milroe doesn't have 2 knee surgeries on his legs. He's going to run better than Michael Penix did, and he's going to be a run-first guy because his athleticism is his best trait. And I think that at times they wanted to lean away from that because, you know, I understand you wanted to be a better passer, but at some point you are what you are. And again, one of them is a guy that could throw the ball anywhere and dot a map anywhere. And the other guy, as hard as you try with him, his best attribute is just going to be his arm strength. And that's what you saw.
And I do think that Jalen Milroe, like you saw in 2023, when you pair him with a run-first offense and, you know, I kind of put him in that 2 tight end system. I'm not saying Alabama had that year, but ideally put him in that like run-first 2 tight end system. And then you have a defense that backs it up as well. Like you look at a Baltimore Ravens in the NFL. I look at that and I'm like, that's like the prototype of a team that he would thrive on. Not so much a Cincinnati Bengals or a Detroit Lions, but more so like Steelers or Ravens, like that more kind of physical ground and pound type team. Like that's where I just see him being more comfortable. And so you shift this year to somebody like Ty Simpson, who I've heard a wide range of opinions on that young man. I mean, I've heard people say that he could be the top 5, top 3 quarterback in the SEC. I've heard people say that he's going to be in the bottom tier of the SEC. I'm neither. I'm right in the middle because I haven't seen him take a snap yet, and so I'm going to be a bit more level-headed on it. I think the ceiling is high. I think he could be number 3, number 2, number 1. I think he could fall below expectations too. We just haven't seen it yet. But from what I saw in Ty Simpson when I was there, is he has good touch on his passes. He has a good deep ball. He's more of a pocket passer, and I think that that's what this system in Alabama right now with Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer is destined to do is maximize, glorify a pocket passer, and so I just think that that's going to be a better fit this year with Ty Simpson and that offense, and then you pair that with high flying wide receivers, Ryan Williams, Jeremy Bernard, Isaiah Horton from Miami. And everybody forgets about this young man because I hurt last year. We got Jalen Hale coming back this year, too.
I think Brooks is going to probably play a good bit this year, too. One of the freshmen. I mean, and then these freshmen people are really high on. This is such a stacked room, Brian. The wide receivers, there's so many options. Rico Scott, a lot of people that I talked to thought he would enter the spring portal window, and he didn't. Alabama didn't lose a scholarship player in the spring portal window, as I recall.
Nope.
I mean, this is a group of players that if you are proverbially throwing Ty Simpson or whoever it is, I do think it'll be Ty Simpson. But, I mean, say Keelan Russell makes a late push, unseats him. Whoever it is going to be, starting anew. And if you are proverbially throwing him into the lion's den, you feel good about the group of guys around him. And that's something that, again, with like Jalen Hale's injury and Ryan Williams coming into last year was a new guy. He wasn't the flashy guy that he is now. You had more questions than you do this year at the wide receiver position. I mean, Ty Simpson, to me, you have to hold, final judgment on because he's got like a couple dozen high leverage snaps in his entire career, that being the USF game when Tyler Buckner got benched for him. And that game was an unmitigated disaster on levels that have nothing to do with Ty Simpson. That's one that if you're Alabama, you'd just rather flush. But this team, again, like we said, they've got the personnel to get where they want to go.
Oh, absolutely. And also you look at your offensive line this year. It sucks losing Booker, I know, but it's still a really good unit, that running back room. Jam Miller and Richard Young now, and I'm happy to see that it's Richard Young's time now too, because it's another guy that I work with who's a freshman and player development, and that guy's a physical specimen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited to see the breakout of Richard Young this year. But Ty Simpson has a lot of support from all of the units on that team, and he's had, and I characterize it as the benefit of staying behind quarterbacks for the past 3 years and developing. And now that's the other thing I've heard is, well, he sucks. You saw what he did in that USF game, terrible situation he got thrown into. If he was really that good, he would have started over at Milroe. Well, no, that wasn't the vision for the team last year. It was going to be Milroe all along. He won that job last year. He took that team to the SEC championship. He took them to the Rose Bowl. He wasn't going to lose that job. And so, and
he didn't transfer when the coaching change happened.
He didn't transfer. He stayed loyal. He wasn't going to lose that job. And so I think that Ty Simpson get judged because of that, and then because of the brief snippet that we saw out of that USF game, which was a shit show. I wouldn't want to see anybody, especially a sophomore, get thrown into that. But he did, and it was terrible.
That was a game. And again, Alabama hasn't been used to those kind of days. But most teams have them. You go out there, and I guess I would liken it to, you're also a baseball guy, Brian. I would liken it to pitching at Coors Field. You're trying to put a certain spin on your pitches and it just won't break a certain way. Some days you go out there and it's you don't have an explanation for it, but things just aren't happening for you. And I think for Alabama, through a number of things, that was one of those days. Nothing clicked. The gears weren't turning, in the direction. I mean, they were lucky to get out of there. And Alex Golesh talked after the game. I was at his press conference. He's like, "Oh, no moral victories." I'm like, you have had, I'm not saying you specifically as in Alex Golesh, but this program has been one of the worst in FBS football for the last half decade, since those late 2010 studs all left. And they just almost scalped Nick Saban in what turned out to be his final year. I mean, it was a huge stepping point for USF, and they've been a lot better since then. Alabama, honestly, the program could have cratered after that. I mean, some people are surprised it didn't. That could have been a situation where you go out against Ole Miss that next week, and that was a competitive game. You lose that game, and all of a sudden the program's over. I mean, it could have really gone one of two ways, and instead you win the SEC, go to the playoff. If you had a center that could snap the football, you might have gone to the national championship game. Different trajectories. I don't even remember where I started off on this, but you're going to have days like that, and I think that Kalen DeBoer is going to want to cut down on situations like that, regardless of who the quarterback is or what the situation is going into it. He doesn't want Alabama to have those days where nothing's firing.
And so that's another question for you here. Do you think Alabama will look more consistent this year? Because that was the issue last year, was the consistency was just all over the place. So you think they look more consistent this year?
I think they have to. I mean, that's going to be probably one of those things that they put on the bulletin board every day when they're walking into practice, something that I would hope the coaching staff – I mean, if I was the coach of Alabama, I can tell you I'd have a lot more money, and I'd be talking about consistency a lot more often. I would be telling the guys every day that we got to show up, like the other team. Like, you've got to show up like you're playing Georgia every single week. You got to show up like you're playing LSU every single week, regardless of who it is, because there's things that you can't take for granted anymore. And every team is guilty of it at some point. LSU took Troy for granted, and the result was very funny. And then they won the national championship 2 years later, so I guess it turned out okay. But you cannot play, in second gear and expect to win maybe as much as you have in the past. And there were games last year. I mean, they were maybe even in third or fourth gear, certain games last year. You never want to get off the bus like that, because you're just going to create situations. They'd have been a playoff team. They would have been a playoff team if they didn't create those problems for themselves. You want to eliminate those problems, and they can do it because they control how they play. They control the energy and the effort that they play with. They control how they carry that over week to week, regardless of who they're playing, and those are the things they'll have to do.
Well, I kept on saying that going into the Oklahoma game last year. I kept on using this one Sabanism here. Maximum 100% intensity. Snap the final whistle. All 4 quarters. Empty the tank. That was like my mental messaging going into that game. Like, that's what Alabama has to do, because we had the huge win over LSU, the shellacking that turned many heads, and then the Mercer game, whatever. And then you have Oklahoma and Auburn sitting here. So I'm like, you got to empty the tank against these two. The playoff doesn't matter. SEC championship, I don't give a shit. Win these 2 games right here. Play the best of your ability. Maximum intensity. What didn't you see in Norman for a second? Maximum intensity. And it was appalling. But I do think that something like that, I do think that the staff goes back and looks at a game like that, and it's like, all right, this is the adjustment we have to make going into this year. I obviously now you have the bulletin board material going into week 1 now with Thomas Castellanos. Like, I know that there's the bulletin board material for Florida.
I would not talk like that after the year he had last year. I get that he was one of those guys last year that coming into the season was, to some people flying under the radar. Other people, I'm one of them, expected him to be one of the better quarterbacks in the ACC, and he goes out, and you can only classify that as a complete stinker. Every facet, from his actual on-field performance to how he carried himself after he got benched. And, I mean, you're talking about a guy that, as much as the team he's now on has to rebuild from pretty much the ground up, and he's talking like that. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. You're going to have to win that game to have any kind of credibility whatsoever now if you're him for saying those comments.
He could have been just fine. He could have flown on the radar, prepared, battled Alabama better than anybody would have expected him to. He could have been kind of a hero, but now, like, he's in a position where he has to deliver. But with Alabama,
now LT Overton's going to try to take his head off.
It's going to be so entertaining to watch too. And that there's multiple games now this year that Alabama has that fuel for. Of course, there's your natural high octane matchups like Georgia, like LSU. But they want to get back at Vanderbilt. They want to get back at Tennessee. They want to get back at Oklahoma. All those games are at home. But I'm talking about going on the road to Missouri. Like that's a trap game right there.
In South Carolina. South Carolina, the trappiest trap game that ever lived.
Drinkowitz is always cooking something. I think that there's an expectation around Williams-Brice. Like, a place we hop in. You saw it at the A&M last year. You saw it at the Tennessee a few years ago. Like that one, it is the prototypical trap game place. But I think people have higher expectations for South Carolina this year with Lenore Sellers. I think he's one of the best quarterbacks in college football. But nobody's really looking at Missouri right now. You've got Bo Prabula from Penn State there now. I think that this could be one of the better SEC teams that nobody's talking about. Missouri. That's a game right there. Circle your calendar. Maximum intensity, 4 quarters. Don't overlook it. It's going to be a noon game. Does it have the same hype as an LSU game? No. But you've got to empty the tank. It can't be any different. Wisconsin at home. Same thing. Wisconsin's been down the past several years.
Hot seat, Luke Fickell.
But Luke Fickell's on a hot seat. I had a lot of confidence in that hire. I'm disappointed to see where it's gone.
I didn't think it made any sense when it happened because it was obvious Luke Fickell was just waiting for the Ohio State job. And, I mean, frankly, Ryan Day is a couple bad weeks away from getting fired over the last couple of years. I mean, seemed like not to say it was there for the taking would be a wrong phrasing. But, I mean, he now I know – now they won the national championship. Probably that's staved off for the foreseeable. But back then, not so. So, I mean, he definitely could have waited and maybe had a window feasibly to get that job. Wisconsin is one of those teams that, they used to be really good when, like, we were teenagers because of the smash mouth, we're going to win the trenches every time style, and they've gotten away from that. And it's not that they didn't have talent at other parts. I mean, their defenses were, awesome some of those years. I mean, they had Melvin Gordon. Obviously, Corey Clement was excellent. People don't talk about him anymore. It's criminal. But that was, Wisconsin's gift was we're going to beat anybody in the country in the trenches. We may not win the game, but they're going to know they played us. And they won a lot of games. That's a 10-2, 10-3, 9-3 team every year. I mean, and if they ever get back to that, a lot of people are going to be in trouble.
They need to get that fabric back, but I don't see that identity there right now. It sucks. I like when Wisconsin was good, but that's another one of those games. You got a Big Ten team coming in. If you're Alabama, you've got to be ready. You can't overlook it. I know it's in Tuscaloosa, but you cannot overlook that. Like you've got to be prepared for that. And so that was a lot of what was missing last year. But I really think that we can rebound in that respect this year.
I think the biggest question mark on the team other than the quarterback position is everything you brought up about the consistency aspect. If they don't have it, there's nothing to suggest you won't get a repeat of last year. And you could say that about a lot of teams that underachieve. You could say that about an LSU. And I think LSU, by the way, is a playoff team this year. But, I mean, they go out, lose 3 games, you're going to have the same conversation. 3-4 games. Brian Kelly's going to feel a little warmer on his backside if they were to lose 4 games this year, especially with arguably the best quarterback in the country coming back. Talk about game circle on the calendar. I'm sure Alabama has had that one circled. Especially, they don't like to lose to Brian Kelly. Alabama has done a good job with Brian Kelly and done a good job really with LSU over the last decade, but they want to win that game every year. I think Tennessee, all their stuff going on right now, especially at the quarterback position. Oh, man. Never would have expected that in November, but that's a game that they're going to want back. But it's not those games that this is going to be an issue in. It's not those games. It's like the games that you brought up, and then they got to play USF again next year. 2026 USF is coming to Tuscaloosa for the 3rd game of the 2-for-1. And I do think people will be on notice for that game after the last 2, but it's games like that you got to be ready for.
I mean, at this point, USF has really worked us the past 2 times we played them. So we cannot sleep on the Bulls at all by any means.
Well, I just don't think they'd be surprising you if they came out and it was close for 3.5 quarters. And I still think that it could have been even a different game last time if Alex Golesh hadn't decided to pull back the reins and go for 3 instead of 7. at times late in the game. I mean, that was baffling to me when it happened. But if they do that again, they're not going to be shocking anybody this time.
No, I mean, yeah, at this point, lightning struck twice, and you got to be ready for it. But like those are the kinds of games I'm talking about. Missouri is the biggest one that pops off to me as far as that sleeper game goes. Missouri, and you're playing a lot better of an Oklahoma team this year. I think John Material is a huge upgrade from Jackson Arnold's. And
who in turn is an upgrade from Peyton Thorne.
And right, Jackson Arnold's an upgrade from Peyton Thorne, and so I think both Oklahoma and Auburn are better this year. I don't think Vanderbilt's as good this year. Tennessee definitely is not as good this year. But going on the road to Farrett Field and Columbia, Missouri, that's going to be hard. But generally, I guess we'll end this off here. What would you say is your outlook for Alabama this year? What are your expectations as of today?
To me, it's playoff or bust. It's playoff or bust. Be in the 12 teams. You want to win the SEC, but in this new format, and especially foregone conclusion with the expansion to 16 and whatever happens from there, just getting to Atlanta is effectively a bid in and of itself. You want to be in one of those 12 teams. Alabama was number 11 in the rankings last year. They caught a bad break in the Clemson-SMU game, and they still would have got in the playoff, even though they really didn't deserve to. They were still right there at the end. I mean, and should have been over the line if you played like you had the potential to do against teams that were far lesser than the top level that you're going to play year in and year out, and far lesser than like Oklahoma, what those programs are going to be year in and year out. So, I mean, the expectation for this team is to be one of the 12 teams, to make the playoff, to, yes, compete for the SEC. You want to get to Atlanta, but you just want to be – and you then start talking about, obviously, hosting and buys, and those are things that you want to contend for as well. But bottom line, you have to get in the playoff if you're Alabama this year. There's no excuses to not get in the playoff. And
that I think that was the most sickening component of last year was – yes, it was DeBoer's first year, 9-3. Like you can expect some things to go awry. Quarterback coach's first year, I get that, but that was the sickening part. We're seeing a team that good on the outside looking in, where teams, no shade at them, but teams like SMU, Indiana, Boise State. I love Boise State, but Alabama is a much better team, and so to be on the outside of the fence looking in, seeing those teams in. Alabama would have contended much better with Penn State than SMU did. They would have played Notre Dame much better than Indiana would have, and so it hurts to see that. But I really think that the guys feel that motivation, and that's going to power a really successful season this year.
I would agree with that. My one question last year would be, where would Boise have checked in the rankings had they beat Oregon?
That
could we have seen the one next to the blue? Could we have seen that?
3 points off. We were 3 points off.
Well, see, for guys like us, we can talk about that for 3 hours, and obviously that's not what your audience tonight came here for.
Because we're both Boise State guys, so like we can.
Yeah.
You know what?
Next time.
You know what I'm gonna do? So we did Alabama this time. Everybody watching, we're gonna have Will Miller on again in a few weeks. We're going to have a G5 only show. And so it's going to be a G5 preview. Just to have that off the dome. We're doing it in a few weeks because we value the G5 on the air. So we're going to, of course, I'll introduce you as Will Miller from Sports Illustrated and BamaCentral, but this is going to be a G5 show. And so, because I can talk for hours about that. And I want to get into some of these teams that you're like Boise State, Navy has a lot of expectation. Tulane. There's a few of these teams, UNLV. That I want to talk about and get your perspective on. But, Boise State, that's one I think about. Did they beat Oregon? If they never lost to Nevada in 2010, would they have been picked to play Auburn in the Natty? That's just one of those things you think about.
Rose Bowl, not a bad consolation prize.
Rose Bowl, like that. What could Oregon would have been in the Natty against Auburn? So, what could have been the result? It's crazy to think about.
Could have claimed the national championship if they had gone and undefeated and won the Rose Bowl. They could have done a UCF, except with actual merit.
Yeah, and won the granddaddy of them all. So that really is something.
Mm-hmm.
But it was great having you on here, Will. It's just, I can't believe it's your first time coming on here, but it is. You did great. The analysis was fantastic. The conversation was great. I'm sure everybody watching enjoyed it. So it was great having you on.
I appreciate it, Brian. Great catching up with you, and I'm really looking forward to next time, man.
Yes, sir. G5 preview coming soon. I'll announce when that is. But thanks for coming on, Will. And for everybody watching, thank you for watching. Have a great day.